There's no blockbuster filmmaker more consistently cerebral than Christopher Nolan. Sure, Batman Begins is straightforward, but do you really understand the entire plot of Tenet? Well, by the end of this video, you will.
Directed by Christopher Nolan, Interstellar is a fantastic tale of time, space, and love. But if you got a bit lost in the final act of the film, we wouldn't blame you. So let's do our best to walk through the bizarre, mind-bending ending of Interstellar. Life on Earth isn't great in Interstellar. Massive dust storms are tearing up the planet, crops are failing, and soon humanity will cease to exist. Looking for answers, NASA turns to the skies, hoping for some kind of insight.
Okay. Now you need to tell me what your plan is to save the world.
As we learn at the beginning of the film, a group of 12 scientists traveled through a mysterious wormhole that appeared near Saturn to see if the 12 planets on the other side could sustain human life. A few years later, the Endurance and its crew, including Matthew McConaughey's Cooper and Anne Hathaway's Brand, are going to visit the 3 most promising planets in the hopes of colonizing one. When they arrive on Dr. Mann's planet, the heroic scientist assures them this icy cold spot is the perfect place for humans to live.
Our world is cold, stark, but undeniably beautiful.
Unfortunately, it's soon all revealed to be a ruse. Although each of the original 12 scientists knew their trip was one way, Mann admits he never fully considered the possibility that his planet would be uninhabitable and that he might die alone. Although he resisted the urge for years, he eventually falsified his survey data to coax another team to travel to his planet, intending to use the Endurance to escape. At this point, Mann is so desperate to leave that he'll do anything, even kill. Paranoid that the Endurance crew won't go along with his plan once they learn what he's done, Mann attempts to kill Cooper so he can make his getaway. Back on Earth, Cooper's now-grown children find themselves at odds. His daughter, Murph, played by Jessica Chastain, has realized the surface of our planet has become uninhabitable. So naturally, she's trying to persuade her brother Tom to bring his family to the secret NASA facility where she's been working on the gravitational equation that would allow humanity to escape into space en masse. But despite Murph's warnings, Tom refuses to abandon the farmhouse where they grew up. After Cooper left them in their grandfather's care when they were children, never to be heard from again, Tom lost all faith in NASA's ability to help them.
Dad didn't raise you to be this dumb, Tom.
Dad didn't raise me. Grandpa did, and he's buried out back with Mom and Jesse.
Convinced her brother is making a terrible mistake, Murph sets fire to Tom's cornfields, knowing that since Tom relies on his crops for survival, he'll be forced to drive out to try to extinguish the blaze. That buys Murph enough time to return to the house and evacuate Tom's wife and son, likely in the hopes that once Tom realizes his family has gone to the NASA facility, he'll have no choice but to join them. Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Without enough fuel to either return to Earth or travel to the 3rd potentially habitable planet, Cooper proposes to use the gravity of the black hole Gargantua to execute a slingshot maneuver, which would send the Endurance off with enough inertia to reach the planet Dr. Edmonds would send to assess. However, every time the Endurance crew approaches the black hole, its gravitational field distorts their perception of time due to relativity, meaning what they experience is only minutes passes as years for anyone outside Gargantua's gravity.
Every hour we spend on that planet will be 7 years back on Earth.
By executing Cooper's slingshot maneuver, he and Brand will experience time slippage of 51 years. They both realize this means Cooper will have to give up hope of ever seeing his children back on Earth, as they will likely have died of old age by the time the Endurance exits Gargantua's gravity. Still, Cooper knows that his plan is humanity's last chance for survival. Adding even more drama to Cooper's decision is Mann's earlier speech about the moment humans experience before death. According to Mann, as our brains grasp at survival, we'll experience a vision of the thing we most desire to see again. Mann speculates that Cooper's final image will be of his children, since they're his reason for living.
At the moment of death, your mind's gonna push a little bit harder to survive. For them.
By giving up hopes of seeing his children again, Cooper is prioritizing the future of humanity over his own motivations for survival. With its depleted fuel supplies, Endurance must decrease its weight to pull free of Gargantua's gravity after completing Cooper's slingshot maneuver. Before beginning the maneuver, Cooper decides the shuttle holding TARS will detach and drop into the black hole. In addition to relieving the Endurance of the shuttle's weight, Cooper hopes that TARS can collect the quantum data from inside the singularity that NASA scientists on Earth need to complete the gravitational equation that will allow humanity to leave. While odds are slim that TARS will be able to transmit this data back to Earth, Cooper is determined to at least try, since it's his children's last hope of survival. However, Cooper doesn't tell Brand that losing TARS' shuttle won't account for a big enough drop in weight. In fact, an additional shuttle has to detach in order for the Endurance to escape. Cooper decides that he should bite the proverbial bullet, leaving Brand to continue on to Edmund's planet and restart the human race. He doesn't tell Brand until the last moment because he knows she would argue with his decision. But even without the possibility of seeing his children again, Cooper is at peace with his probable death. After falling into the black hole, Cooper continues to record what he's seeing and transmits it back to TARS, hoping the additional data might help scientists back on Earth. Although he expects to eventually get crushed by Gargantua's gravity, Cooper is miraculously spared once his shuttle is ripped apart. And that's when things get crazy. After surviving the wild ride, Cooper gets transported to an infinite, interdimensional library that allows him to look back into different moments in his daughter's childhood bedroom, including the day he left for his mission on the Endurance.
If you're leaving, just go.
No, don't go. Don't go, you idiot.
TARS determines that they made it through Gargantua alive because they were protected by them, the mysterious beings who constructed the wormhole in the first place. Since the beginning of the film, who they are has been a mystery. While NASA realized the wormhole was artificially constructed by some sort of advanced, intelligent beings, they didn't have any information about them beyond the assumption that they must be benevolent. TARS deduces they also must have built this library to help Cooper understand their five-dimensional reality. And sure, it's confusing, but it's also nice to have otherworldly beings on your side. Although the library where they bring Cooper seems to go on forever, every part of this room serves as a window into the exact same place, his daughter Murph's childhood bedroom. At first, Cooper seems to think he's been brought to her because of his own desire to see her again, but TARS helps him understand they have constructed this three-dimensional reality for Cooper, allowing him to access all five dimensions in a way he can understand.
That's why they want to help us, huh?
I don't know, but they constructed this three-dimensional space inside their five-dimensional reality to allow you to understand it.
Together, TARS and Cooper figure out that through the library, Cooper is able to physically influence different points in space-time by using gravity to move things, as time and gravity are the fourth and fifth dimensions that exist in their reality. But what's the point of all this? Cooper deduces that he's been brought here to send a message back through time, using gravity, and that Murph has to be the one to receive it. Cooper realizes that while he thought they were fixated on him, he's not actually the one who's most important to saving humanity. Murph is. The library exists to ensure that Cooper will be able to deliver his daughter the information she needs right when she needs it. After Cooper finds himself stuck in the library, he realizes he's supposed to pass along the quantum data that TARS collected from inside Gargantua. The information the robot gathered from inside the black hole will help Murph save mankind. And Cooper is the interdimensional messenger, selected by the same mysterious forces that constructed this library and created the wormhole near Saturn.
But something sent you here. They chose you. Well, who's they?
And once Cooper understands his new purpose, he realizes the creatures who've been assisting humanity aren't extraterrestrial at all.
They didn't bring us here at all. We brought ourselves.
As it turns out, at some point in the future, humanity will advance to a place where we can navigate through all five dimensions. It's these future humans who used gravity to create the wormhole that allowed NASA to send scientists to explore the 12 planets in the first place. These future humans are also the ones who protected Cooper from the effects of Gargantua. Just as Cooper is able to use the library to influence events that, for him, already happened, The humans of the future have been using their understanding of time and gravity to ensure their own survival by assisting Cooper, Murph, NASA, and the other humans of their past. After realizing why the library exists and that they want Cooper to give Murph the quantum data she needs to save the world, TARS asks how Cooper plans to communicate such complex information from another dimension.
Love, TARS, love. It's just like Brand said. My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable. It's the key.
The robot doesn't understand, but Cooper explains that he can trust his love for his daughter to guide him to exactly where he needs to be. As Brand explained earlier in the film, love is the only thing that transcends all dimensions, including time and space. Cooper decides to code the quantum data into the second hand of the watch he gave Murph before he left, assuring TARS that she will one day return for it. When TARS asks how Cooper can be sure, he responds,
"Because I gave it to her."
He's confident that her love for him will lead her to where she needs to go, just as his love led him back to her. Sure enough, as all this is happening, the adult Murph has indeed returned to her childhood bedroom, drawn by an unseen force. She suddenly understands the ghost from earlier in the film. The entity trying to contact her with dust patterns on her bedroom floor was actually her father. Reminded of her love for him, she finds the watch, and voila! Things are suddenly starting to look up for humanity. With the planet dying, humans have to evacuate the place fast. But to solve the gravitational equation that allows humanity to escape from the tethers of Earth, you need quantum data gathered from inside a black hole.
The equation couldn't reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics. You need more.
More what?
More data. You need to see into a black hole.
Thinking that collecting such data is impossible, Murph believes the people of Earth are doomed and that her father has abandoned her. However, once she realizes that Cooper was her childhood ghost and that he's given her the data she needs through the watch, she's able to solve the equation, ensuring humanity's survival. Once Cooper passes along the quantum data, the library tesseract begins to collapse, having served its purpose. Cooper loses consciousness, and he later wakes up on a space habitat orbiting Saturn. Just as they brought Cooper to a library and allowed him to communicate with his daughter and save humanity, they also brought him back to safety once he was finished with his mission. Only instead of Earth, he's now on a gigantic colony floating through space. Thanks to Murph's calculations and the data acquired from the black hole, humans were finally able to leave Earth en masse. And now they're spread out over several different space habitats. And it's all thanks to those mysterious forces who helped Cooper in the library and made sure people would find him once it was time for the library to close. Due to the time slippage that Brand warned about before executing the slingshot maneuver around Gargantua, at least 51 years have passed for the people of Earth, but it's only been hours for Cooper. By the time he makes it to the space habitat known as Cooper Station, his daughter, Murph, whom he last saw as a little girl, is an old woman on the verge of death. On the flip side, Cooper appears to be about the same age as he was when he left. While Cooper is overjoyed to finally be reunited with his daughter, Murph knows that she won't live much longer and tells him that he should go so that he doesn't have to watch her die.
No parent should have to watch their own child die.
Cooper takes his daughter's advice and steals a ship, intending to head back through the wormhole and join Brand on Edmund's planet. Like Cooper, she would have only recently arrived, and she'll soon be entering hypersleep, keeping her the same age until he reaches her. Sadly, Edmunds himself has died at some point during the decades he spent waiting for NASA to send a team to his planet. But as Brand takes off her helmet and breathes in the air of her new home at his gravesite, it's evident this is the planet the astronauts have been searching for, where humanity can rebuild and eventually thrive again.
Christopher Nolan's epic Batman series ended on a somewhat confusing note. Batman was essentially dead, Bruce Wayne retired in Italy, and all the villains met a slow, dramatic end. But every resolution seemed to bring yet another cliffhanger. So what exactly happened with the finale of The Dark Knight Rises? During the climax of the movie, Batman scoops up the bomb threatening Gotham with his Batpod, and shoots off toward the ocean as fast as he can, where it eventually explodes at a safe distance from the city. The now dead Batman is finally hailed as the hometown hero he was all along, and Alfred heads to Florence, likely holding on to a sliver of hope that he'll find Bruce Wayne living a new life as a quiet family man, just as he'd described at the beginning of the film. Of course, Alfred does spot Bruce lunching with Selina Kyle in a pitch
pitch-perfect resolution that, well, seems almost too good to be true. And for many viewers, it was. Some fans interpreted this as another instance of Christopher Nolan spinning top-style trickery. They saw the scene of Wayne's perfect retirement as a part of Alfred's imagination. But Christian Bale says what we saw was what we got.
My personal opinion is, no, it was not a dream. That was for real.
The fact that Lucius Fox later discovers that the autopilot function on the Bat had been restored by Bruce himself certainly lent some credence to Alfred's vision too. If Batman was the Dark Knight, then Officer John Blake as the franchise's Robin is certainly a lighter shade of justice.
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin. Thanks.
The orphan boy turned honest cop was a champion of kids in need and helped reconnect Wayne Enterprises with the orphanage he'd grown up in. He's also the perfect person to take over and become the city's newest masked hero in Batman's stead. A future that was heavily hinted at when he found the Batcave at the end of the film. We don't get to see what his crime-fighting style might be like, but based on his do-gooder attitude throughout the collapse of the city, Blake could be an optimistic successor to Wayne's tenure as Gotham's resident hero. So the movie's closing moments where Blake gets the key to the cave asks the obvious question. It's been several years since The Dark Knight Rises closed out Nolan's Batman trilogy, but the ending to the film definitely left the door open to more exploration of his grim vision of Gotham City. With Blake taking over the Batcave and plenty of villains from the comics waiting for their turn on screen, there's a ton of material to make this film series a quadrilogy or even larger. Unfortunately, the would-be star of such a sequel, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, has cast doubt on the idea of Nolan's series ever getting a fourth installment. He told Cinema Blend, "I think Nolan very much thought of that movie as a conclusion, and there's a theme that runs through all three of these movies that begins in the first movie, runs through the second movie, and it concludes in that moment where he says that Batman is more than a man. Batman is a symbol." And so to have another man other than Bruce Wayne kind of becoming Batman at the end of that trilogy, I think that's the perfect ending to that story. But still, even if Nolan and Gordon-Levitt aren't interested in returning to the material, another filmmaker could, in theory, pick up where Nolan's series left off somewhere down the line. After all, Bryan Singer's Superman Returns was a sequel to Superman 2, 26 years later, and Singer straight up ignored Superman 3 and 4, so never say never.
The Prestige proved even further that Christopher Nolan wasn't a director to ignore. Years later, we still can't get over the film's central twist, which, like a true magician, Nolan hid in plain sight. Here's how he pulled off the trick. Everything in The Prestige plays fairly with the audience regarding the central trick. The ending is telegraphed repeatedly through nearly every character and every line, making it one of the most surprising and paradoxically most foreshadowed twists in movie history. It's all summed up in the opening narration by John Cutter, where he breaks down the trick into 3 acts: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige.
Now, you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know.
As Cutter narrates, the camera pans over a series of identical birds, one of whom he chooses to make disappear and then reappear as the prestige part of the trick. We'll see this bird trick later, when Sarah brings her nephew to a magic show, which causes him to burst into tears at the thought of the bird's death.
See? He's alright, he's fine. Look at him.
But where's his brother?
It surprises Alfred Borden to hear the question about the bird's brother, not just because a child can see through the trick, but because it's his trick, the central twist of the movie. Borden is Fallon, each a twin living half of a life sharing the spotlight. At the beginning of the film, Angia reads a passage from Borden's diary, and the audience is given its first glimpse into what triggered the pair's long-standing feud. Borden's narration here is easily able to trick the audience.
We were 2 young men at the start of a great career. 2 young men devoted to an illusion. 2 young men who never intended to hurt anyone.
The audience is primed to think that this narration refers to Borden and Angia based on the premise of the movie, but that's not right. Borden and Angia never devote themselves to an illusion. Borden and Fallon do. They've devoted themselves to the illusion that there's only one Borden, and that they never intended to hurt anyone is true. Angia's first move against Borden involves a loaded pistol. So the implication that the 2 young men who never intended harm are Borden and Angia is dismissed within the next 30 minutes of screen time. The movie wastes no time in telling you exactly what's happening, but it's so obvious you can't help but be swept along if you're not paying attention. After Angia's wife escapes a water tank, Borden, Angia, and Cutter discuss their different philosophies on magic.
A real magician tries to invent something new that other magicians are going to scratch their heads over, you know?
When Cutter asks him if he has such a trick, Borden says he does, but he refused to sell it, as no one else can do it. This scene serves a variety of purposes. Firstly, it shows how Cutter knows the business well enough to shoot down Borden's every idea for being reckless. But it also shows how desperate Borden is to create a trick that specifically confuses other magicians. As the two men discuss money and selling tricks, Angia doesn't say much, content to just watch. Cutter and Borden are working-class people, whose jobs depend on their own success, but Angia comes from money and doesn't feel the need to engage. Tellingly, the audience doesn't figure into their conversation. Cutter keeps mentioning money, while Borden pushes for the act of creation, performance, and magic as the highest ideal, something only other magicians can understand. To confuse another practitioner is the highest praise, and Angia will spend the rest of the film suitably scratching his head over Borden's transported man trick. Cutter tells Angia and Borden that if they want to see what it takes to do real magic, they need to go see Chung-Ling Soo, who can make a full fish tank appear on stage. Borden and Angia go, and afterwards the pair watch the old man dodder into a cab.
This is the trick. This is the performance. Right here. This is why no one can detect his method.
As he speaks, the camera zooms into Borden's face to underscore the seriousness of what he's saying. We're watching a confession, Borden recognizing a fellow practitioner willing to shape his entire life around the performance of magic. Once again, he never mentions the audience, only the art, the sacrifice. It's empowering for him to see that his trick can work. Later, Angia will show off the trick for his wife Julia, but he does it half-mockingly, in disbelief that anyone could or would want to do it.
It's unthinkable. Borden saw it at once, but I couldn't fathom it, living my whole life pretending to be someone else.
It's a key foreshadowing of why Angia will be the only one who can't believe Borden uses a double. The self-sacrifice, the pretending, he admits right there that it's unthinkable to him. When Julia drowns in the water tank, Angia becomes obsessed with finding out the truth behind which knot Borden used to tie her wrists, and able to accept that Borden cannot remember. It's a question that hangs over the men throughout the film, with Borden confessing finally that even he would never know.
I have fought with myself over that night. One half of me swearing blind that I tied a simple slip knot. The other half convinced that I tied the length of double.
Borden can't give Angia a simple answer about which knot he tied because the twins trade off on different days. One twin would have tied the simple knot, the other would have tied the Langford double, but Borden can't say whether he knows. Whether it's the Borden who tied the knot, or the Borden who truly doesn't know which knot he tied. The illusion requires self-sacrifice. Of all the characters in The Prestige, Sarah comes the closest to realizing Borden is two people. She tells Borden early on in the film that she can tell he doesn't always mean it when he says he loves her.
Maybe today you're more in love with magic than me. I like being able to tell the difference. It makes the days it is true mean something.
The surviving Borden, the one who confesses to Angia the secret, is the one who loves Sarah. The other Borden is the one who falls in love with Olivia. But at this point in the film, he's not with anyone else, so Sarah guesses that he's in love with magic instead. This is also when Fallon enters the picture, prompting concern from Sarah that they don't have enough to pay him.
Don't worry about it, man. I'll share half my food with him or something.
A clever reference to Fallon sharing half of everything with Borden immediately before Sarah tells him that they're going to have a baby.
We should have told Fallon. That is great, we're having a baby.
The we in that sentence is deceptive, since it seems like he's talking about himself and Sarah, but he's really referencing Fallon/other Borden too. They're all having a baby together, since they shared everything, each living half a life, which includes Sarah and their daughter. When Borden begins sharing his transported man, Angia becomes obsessed with it. Although Cutter insists it's done with a double, Angia is convinced otherwise. The audience should believe Cutter, since he's consistently shown to be wise and knowledgeable. Later, after Olivia and Borden begin their affair, she tells Angia that she found disguise materials not used for the show. At times, Borden couldn't possibly be watching. We should be listening to these characters, but we're too caught up in Angia's passion. His attempt to duplicate the trick involves him hiring a double of his own, Gerald Root, also played by Jackman in a slight nod to Borden's true secret. Root is sleazy, an alcoholic with too much pride, and not enough to live for, a disturbing mirror to the vices that Angia dabbles with throughout the film. But though Root is played by Jackman, he can't possibly live like Borden does with his trick. It rankles Angia to spend his prestige huddled underneath the stage, while his double takes a bow. He's jealous of himself in a way Borden can never be. The self-sacrifice demanded of real magic too much for him. It pushes him to send Olivia to infiltrate Borden's trust, leading to disaster for everyone. Until one of the Borden twins falls in love with Olivia, they're united in their desires. They achieve success, a family, and the art they dreamed of. But once they fracture, it leads to strife. Angier kidnaps Fallon and buries him to get the cipher for a fake notebook of Borden's, thinking this will lead him to the secret behind the transported man. It won't, of course, but the point of the scene is that Fallon's near-death encounter leads one of the Borden twins to arrive to a dinner date with Sarah, stinking drunk with Olivia along for the ride.
I had a terrible ordeal today. I thought that something very precious had been lost.
This line is in reference to the other Borden twins' near-death experience, but regardless, the blatant appearance of Olivia pushes Sarah towards alcoholism, and eventually ends with her taking her own life when she can't stand Borden's lies anymore. The openness with which Borden conducts his affair with Olivia brings to the fore all the repressed feelings Sarah was able to push down, forcing her to kill herself rather than fully betray Borden and reveal his secret. Of all of the plot points in the film, Tesla and his cloning machine received the most derision. While it's true that the science fiction edition is a surprise, it serves a few important points. First, Tesla and Edison's rivalry mirrors Angier and Borden's, continuing the motif of reflections and doubles that pervades the movie. Second, it's symbolic of the corruption of Angier as a magician. He's not disappearing and bringing himself back the way the turn and the prestige require. He's just copying himself over and over, killing himself in a sickening penance for the death of his wife in the same manner. Finally, in his own way, Angier is ultimately proven right in his assertion that every trick can be duplicated. By cloning himself, he's able to duplicate the ultimate trick of Borden's act, the use of an identical twin. The difference between them is that he'd rather kill his twin than live his life pretending to be someone he's not. Angier arrives at Borden's cell to gloat and tear apart the secret to the transported man that he'd so obsessed over throughout the entire movie. Borden gives Fallon a tearful goodbye, admitting that he was right, that they should have left Angier alone.
Go alone now. Both of us.
It's the closest the two brothers get to openly speaking to each other, with Borden apologizing for the way his affair with Olivia led to Sarah's death. Borden's escorted to the hangman's noose, where he's asked about his final words. He disappears, but that's not magic. You can't just make something disappear, you have to bring it back. Borden shoots Angier, standing alone in a hall of his drowned clones, and lays out the truth. He was Fallon, and Fallon was Borden, the two men sharing one life. He reiterates that that's what magic costs, that the art requires devotion and sacrifice, a sacrifice Angier could never match. All this, he tells him, was for nothing. Angier tells Borden that he never understood why they did this.
The audience knows the truth. The world is simple. Miserable.
Angier goes on to explain that if you have the ability to make an audience wonder in spite of this, then you got to see something very special. It's a direct plea to the audience, straight from writers Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, that the ability to trick the audience, to make them imagine a world like their own, but different, that exists right at their fingertips. Borden says earlier in the film that the secret impresses no one, but we're not so sure. Some tricks are even more impressive when you see the self-sacrifice, the total devotion to the art. Was J. Robert Oppenheimer plagued by guilt for his role in creating the atomic bomb? Or did he ultimately see himself as a hero for his scientific achievement? The ending of Oppenheimer attempts to answer these questions, and many more. There are a number of primary threads that weave their way through Oppenheimer. First and foremost is the Manhattan Project, but that arc doesn't begin until the middle act. The first hour primarily concerns Oppenheimer's early years, including the beginning of his time at UC Berkeley. Before he's recruited to build the bomb, he becomes involved in a number of leftist political organizations. These are later held over his head as both leverage and the weight with which rival Lewis Strauss attempts to sink him. The rest of the film follows the development of the A-bomb, which sees Oppenheimer drift ever further from the morals that once guided him. After the war, he seems a shell of his former self, and is made an enemy by his own government. The final act of Oppenheimer truly starts after the Trinity test. Every moment before builds up to the first A-bomb detonation. It's the inescapable event around which the whole movie revolves, and everything that happens afterwards is in response to the weapon's creation. Early on in the construction of the Los Alamos facility, Oppenheimer's close friend and colleague, Isidore Isaac Rabi, objects to the project of building a bomb, telling him that the military is only using the scientists as tools. They need us, Oppenheimer tells him. Until they don't, Rabi replies. As soon as the successful Trinity test is over, we see just how right he was. General Leslie Groves, who up to this point has been one of Oppenheimer's strongest supporters, quickly brushes him off. He promises to keep the director updated on plans to use a bomb against Japan, but his cavalier tone lays bare the emptiness in his words. Later, after the horrific bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer makes an appointment with President Harry S. Truman.
Truman needs to know what's next. What's next?
In the meeting with the president, Oppenheimer argues for heavy international regulation and strict bans on further atomic weapons use. Truman laughs him off, sends him away, and calls him a crybaby. After the end of World War II, Oppenheimer shifts focus for its final act. Lewis Strauss becomes a primary villain of sorts, as it's revealed that he orchestrated the farcical hearings to revoke Oppenheimer's security clearance. Because so much of the film is spent on the Manhattan Project itself, we don't get as much time developing the relationship between the two men. Early on, we see how Strauss courts Oppenheimer to chair the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton after the war. We also see Oppenheimer embarrass him on several occasions, generally related to his opposition to the H-bomb, of which Strauss is a huge proponent. Though his early efforts to sweep Oppenheimer off of the political stage are successful, Strauss is later punished when he's denied a cabinet appointment. What's the purpose of Strauss's story in the larger scope of the film? Aside from being the man who made it his mission to destroy Oppenheimer, Strauss represents an opposite kind of historical figure. He wishes to be remembered for his impact on the world, and is obsessed with how others view him. Oppenheimer, by contrast, is made famous whether he likes it or not. His actions immortalize him as a hero to some and a villain to many others. Strauss never achieves that level of infamy, though in a twisted way, he wants it. The security hearings that stripped Oppenheimer of his reputation play an important role in the film. One of the earliest scenes show Oppenheimer reading a statement to the assembled review board, even though he knows it won't go over well. As Robbie tells him, it's a kangaroo court, but Oppenheimer still fights hard to preserve his name. It's not technically a trial, but the effect is the same. And while the US government puts Oppenheimer on the stand against accusations of communist sympathizing and anti-American activity, the film puts him on trial for much larger issues. So how are people today to judge him? Perhaps he's right that someone else inevitably would have built the bomb had he not, but his repeated claims of not being responsible for how it's used ring hollow. Oppenheimer tells Truman that he has blood on his hands, and he does, quite a bit in fact. During the hearings, his wife Kitty says that history will never forgive him, whether or not he lets himself be tarred and feathered. Despite his progressive political leanings, his support for organized labor, and his persistent pushes to stop nuclear development after the war, Oppenheimer cannot be cleared of the crimes his work allowed.
I don't know if we can be trusted with such a weapon.
The Lewis Strauss plotline ends in pretty dramatic fashion, with his cabinet nomination officially getting blocked, thanks in part to a vote from a young John F. Kennedy. An unnamed political aide puts a bullet on the Strauss arc with a line that calls out the villainous character's enormous ego. After hearing of his rejection, Strauss puts the blame on Oppenheimer, stating that he turned the scientific community against him. According to Strauss, it all started when Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein had a conversation about him by a pond at Princeton. As the aide points out though, Strauss has no way of knowing that the new physicist was speaking about him. Perhaps he suggests they were discussing something more important. In the film's final scene, we learn that Einstein and Oppenheimer were indeed talking about much larger issues. Strauss's self-obsession is reflective of one of the movie's main ideas, that men who aspire to be great often disregard the greater ramifications of their actions. There's a distinction between Einstein and Oppenheimer, both of whom carry a level of intense regret for their successes, and Strauss, who only cares about being on the cover of Time. During the final moments of Oppenheimer, we get a glimpse of the physicist's twilight years. In 1963, he receives the Enrico Fermi Award from the President of the United States, signifying a rehabilitation of his national image in the annals of history. Still, it's a hollow moment. In their conversation by the pond, Einstein predicts that Oppenheimer will receive an award for his work. However, he also says that it won't really be for Oppenheimer, but for the people who give it to him. Such is a reward for great men who yield terrible consequences, Einstein tells him. In the wake of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, Oppenheimer is plagued by guilt. This is one area where the movie takes a fair share of creative license with the real Oppenheimer's life. We know from his work that he opposed the use of atomic weapons after the war, as well as the development of even more deadly weapons like the hydrogen bomb. However, it's impossible to know whether or not he was truly stricken in the way depicted in the movie. But in Nolan's version, Oppenheimer begins to have horrifying visions immediately after the end of the war. His speech to the other scientists at Los Alamos, in which he claims that his only regret is that the bomb wasn't finished in time to be used against the Nazis, did happen.
It's about unleashing strong force before the Nazis do.
In the movie, this becomes a loaded claim, as Oppenheimer seems far less confident in the way the weapon was used against Japan. His conviction is largely based on the necessity of beating Hitler to the superweapon. However, without that concrete enemy, he seems lost. During his Los Alamos speech, Oppenheimer begins to experience hellish visions of the end of the world. He sees flashes of white light that mirror the explosion at the Trinity test, followed by grotesque shots of the skin peeling off of the assembled scientists. Outside, he sees a couple cowering in fear and a young man vomiting uncontrollably on the ground. It's the film's way of showing a tiny portion of the atrocities committed by the US against Japan, imagined through Oppenheimer's perfect knowledge of the weapon and channeled through his own corner of the world. In the film, years pass, but the visions don't stop. Oppenheimer is plagued by dreams of fire engulfing the earth, which punctuate every act of the film as grim reminders of what he's wrought. Then at the very end, we get an even more vivid vision of the future, one that hasn't actually come to pass. Chatting with Einstein by the pond, Oppenheimer sees the intercontinental ballistic missiles that later grow out of his creation. He imagines himself in the cockpit of an airplane, watching the sky as nuclear warheads blaze by overhead. A patch of peaceful sunny cloud cover is shattered by countless rockets launching. From orbit, we see the very atmosphere of the Earth catching fire. Thankfully, this nightmare hasn't come to pass in the real world, but even in a post-Cold War age, the threat remains. In his conversation with Einstein by the pond, Oppenheimer lays bare his guilt. The older scientist tells him that he'll spend the rest of his life grappling with the consequences of his achievements. Accomplishment means nothing when the thing you've accomplished is a nightmare, the movie seems to say. Though Oppenheimer completed everything he set out to do at Los Alamos, the conviction that initially compels him has turned hollow by the time the bomb is dropped. In this moment, it's easy to reflect on his earlier scenes. His first class taught at UC Berkeley to only one student stands out. Despite a practically empty classroom, Oppenheimer is filled with excited energy. He talks about light, space, and his black hole theories. He talks about the magic of quantum physics, and there's a genuine joy in his voice. What would have become of him if he had instead stayed in that field of study? What if he had continued his labor organizing and focused solely on quantum theory, leaving the Manhattan Project to others? When he signs on, he believes it's a necessary evil to defeat Germany. But that turns out not to be true. By then, though, he believes he's too far gone. He can't go back to the classroom in the same way. So he chooses to see his achievement through to its conclusion, murderous though it may be. Throughout its entirety, Oppenheimer keeps coming back to the idea of chain reactions. It's the core principle that makes nuclear weapons work. And it's the final note of the final scene. While speaking with Einstein, Oppenheimer recalls making calculations that led him to believe that an atomic detonation might set the entire planet on fire. Though this proved to be wrong, he believes that they still started a chain reaction that will destroy the world. The whole movie is filmed like a chain reaction, with fragmented scenes spliced in between each other, constantly rolling from one thing to the next with no breaks. It's a cascading series of events that no one, viewer or character, can stop. After successfully building the bomb, Oppenheimer can't turn back the clock. Physics takes over, leaving him with the weight of what he's done.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
In time, this chain reaction blows back on him, leading to the security hearings and the revocation of his government clearance. His wife is forced to hear the ugly details of his affairs, and though she stands by him, their relationship is deeply scarred. The A-bomb begets the H-bomb, which leads to an ongoing wave of world-ending weapons. What we're left with at the end of Oppenheimer is a full portrait of a man. He loves literature, language, and art. Is he a communist? According to him, only sort of, though he opposes fascism on all fronts and donates to numerous left-leaning causes. He's a father, but not a good one by his own admission. He's an excellent scientist. From a certain angle, however, he may be the worst of them all. By the end, Oppenheimer is fully aware that he's anything but a hero, and that he may not even be deserving of pity. And yet, he knows that history is anything but concrete. Alfred Nobel created dynamite, he reminds us, but is remembered for his contributions to learning. Perhaps the most unsettling thing about Oppenheimer is that we still don't know what his full legacy will be.
Christopher Nolan's movies often require a repeat screening or two to fully process all the plot layers and subtle details, and Inception is no different. Don't worry though, we've got your back. Let's dive into explaining the ending of Inception. At its core, Inception is about two things: grief and guilt. Leonardo DiCaprio's Cobb is working to get back to his children after his wife Mal committed suicide, which looks more like Cobb himself killed her. At least that's how he remembers it. But his memories are clouded by guilt over his role in her death. After an experiment gone wrong, which trapped Mal and Cobb together for what seemed like decades in limbo, Mal became so absorbed into the dream world that she could no longer tell the difference between the different layers of existence. In her mind, the waking world was just another layer she needed to kick herself out of. So when she leaped from a high-rise hotel, she didn't think she'd actually kill herself. Cobb feels so responsible for Mal's death that he keeps his sharpest memories of her locked away in his mind. But when his protege, Ariadne, releases mind mal into the dream, she becomes his biggest obstacle in completing his Inception mission for Mr. Sato. She creeps into the third layer of the group mission and sends their target, Robert Fisher, into limbo. Cobb eventually realizes mind mal is just a projection of his guilt and grief and lets Ariadne kill her. That theme of getting through a difficult loss like this plays out on a parallel plane with Robert Fisher, as he's basically guided through the 5 stages of grief amid the looming death of his dad. In the end, Cobb decides to embrace the reality he's currently in with his children. In doing so, he also lets go of his guilt and grief. It's probably no coincidence that Nolan lost his own father in 2009, suggesting that Inception may just be his most personal film ever.
Chris is very expressive in what he's trying to accomplish, but it is insulated in his own mind, so we knew that we had to take a leap of faith.
The biggest question viewers have after seeing Inception is this: will the spinning top at the end ever fall down? The top was a totem Cobb had created to show whether or not he was in a dream or in true reality. In a dream, it would spin forever, but in the real world, it would eventually fall over. For Nolan, though, the whole point of that ending is that it doesn't matter to Cobb anymore whether he's in a dream world or the real world, which is why he doesn't bother waiting to find out the results of his final spin. He's happy to be reunited with his children, and he decides that this is the reality he wants to live in, regardless of whether it's a dream or not.
We all dream. It's a universal experience, but a very private one.
In Greek mythology, Ariadne is a young goddess of the island of Crete who's put in charge of a labyrinth that sees the sacrifice of several Athenians each year. But upon finding affection for one of its would-be victims, Theseus, she helps him escape by giving him a red string and a sword to defeat the Minotaur and find his way out of the maze. Not only does Inception's Ariadne almost always wear red, but she also slowly but surely shows Cobb the way to overcome his own demon, the long, lingering image of his dead wife. Some fans theorize Ariadne may have originally been hired by Stephen Miles, Mal's father, to discover whether Cobb had actually killed Mal or was as innocent as he claimed. That would explain why Ariadne is so acutely interested in delving into Cobb and Mal's history. After seeing the toll it takes on him, however, she may have developed a fondness or sympathy for him and decides to help him escape in the end, much like her mythological namesake. Cobb and crew have to sift through a lot of layers to get to the bottom of Fisher's allegiance to his father's company, but by the end, it becomes clear that all Fisher ever really wanted was the affection and respect of his old man. That's why, when his dad tells him to open the safe that's been planted by Cobb's team in his Dreamworld hospital room, all it contains was a pinwheel that reminds Fisher of one of the few happy memories from his childhood. For Fisher, the pinwheel signifies that his dad treasured him more than he ever let on, which gives value to his suggestion that Fisher go off and become his own man, and thus dissolve the company that's causing Mr. Sato so much trouble. While Sato isn't exactly evil, he's willing to go to some great lengths in order to get a financial profit for his company, including literally entering someone else's mind and planting thoughts in it. But Sato's plan backfires spectacularly when he dies within the dream and is sent to limbo. Cobb manages to rescue him, but not until Sato has aged to the point of senility. When they finally emerge from their dream and back into reality, Sato isn't thrilled about his financial victory, but instead he's rather stoic and seems to have experienced a change of heart as a result of his time in limbo. With both Sato and Fisher, Nolan seems to be saying there's a lot more to life than the pursuit of wealth, a theme he would pick up on his next film, The Dark Knight Rises.
We go to Christopher Nolan movies for specific things: head-spinning twists, bombastic visual effects, and big questions about the nature of reality. All of these come to the fore in Tenet, and the result is naturally confusing. Time, relativity, and perception of reality are concepts explored in many of Christopher Nolan's films. Tenet is, in part, assembled from many little pieces of those previous works, filtered through a new perspective like a kind of greatest hits reel. It has the same sense of social responsibility and civic duty featured in his Batman trilogy. It shares some reverse chronology elements with Memento. It at times evokes Dunkirk, a war drama about the indomitable human spirit tested by unprecedented conflict. Interstellar and Inception both involve time manipulation, though the effects in those movies are more about relative acceleration of time into the future, where Tenet portrays time as being flexible in both directions. The plot of Tenet, as you might expect at this point, has a whole lot going on. The basic idea is this. The nameless protagonist, played by John David Washington, has been recruited into a shadowy collective of people that can identify themselves by a hand sign of interlaced fingers and the word Tenet. Pieces of broken detritus are coming back through time, implying mass destruction from some future global conflict. The protagonist has proven himself trustworthy enough to assist this loose conglomeration of insiders who are trying to understand and prevent whatever it is that's happening in the future. We learn with the protagonist that all the items arriving in the past are inverted, meaning their entropy, the scientific concept of energy, is progressing thermodynamically backwards relative to the past, which is of course itself moving toward the future. If the balance of inverted objects ever become equal with the amount of forward-moving objects, space-time will be annihilated. No pressure, right? The protagonist secures the assistance of a CIA attaché named Neil to get him to exotic locales, meet people suspected of knowing more about Tenet, and ultimately follow that chain back to the apparent source of the inverted items, Andre Sater, who is said to have a mysterious ability to communicate with the future. He is also able to grant the quality of inversion through devices called turnstiles, machines that may or may not be quantum entangled, and that essentially let people and objects move backward through time. The protagonist ultimately discovers that the main item they're chasing is the algorithm, 9 physically connectable objects that encapsulate the mathematical concept by which inversion is possible. The unnamed inventor of the algorithm is said to have made these objects and scattered them, video game style, in the past, to keep the algorithm secret safe, and then she killed herself. Confused yet?
Oh, we'll try and keep up.
During the climax, which takes place in a former Soviet closed city, we are shown that Neil and the protagonist are placed on opposite sides of the so-called temporal pincer movement. 2 combat teams, one inverted and one not, operating simultaneously in time to assist each other in acquiring the algorithm. During the mission briefing, a military commander named Ives mentions there is also a turnstile on site, another machine with which one can invert themselves in time. This fact is not lost on Neil. After Neil sees one of Sater's henchmen lay a tripwire on the battlefield, he tries to warn the protagonist before it's too late. When he fails and the tripwire is set off, he sneaks his way into the facility and passes through the enemy's turnstile, just as the protagonist and Ives arrive underneath it to try and gain control of the algorithm. That's why he's able to get back into the Humvee and get to the top of the hill to pull Ives, the protagonist, and the algorithm out from the pit. The body on the other side of the locked gate in the pit is Neil, but another Neil. We know because of the red string with a washer on the end, which we've been seeing throughout the movie, and can only assume is a reference to the Chinese concept of the red string of fate. The presence of that string, which the protagonist sees on Neil's back when they part ways, proves that Neil is also the man who saved the protagonist with the inverted bullet in the opening scene at the opera. However, we never see how that Neil ends up at the gate. This is a sacrificial move on Neil's part that occurs after we see his last scene. That's why the protagonist tries to stop him from getting on the helicarrier, and why Neil tells him that what's happened, happened, and that it's the end of their friendship for him. The movie reveals Neil in pieces: acquaintance, ally, confidant, and ultimately a very old friend to the protagonist. Looking back on the rest of the movie once you realize Neil's entire deal, it's suddenly a more emotional film. Neil appears to struggle in some scenes not to be quite too friendly, though he clearly wants to be. He knows the protagonist loves Diet Coke, but he'll pretend to be classy by claiming he likes club soda more. Knowledge that isn't the product of a dossier, but a long friendship whiled away at bars post-mission. Neil appears literally everywhere there are gaps in the protagonist's plan. A place he can't be, chasing an object he cannot reach, fighting an enemy that he cannot see or is overpowered by. Knowing as we do from the end of the film that Neil has been operating backwards through the protagonist's life at this critical point in his history, that can only mean that these two are the very best of friends, and it takes a massive amount of trust and confidence to give someone you care about that mission. And even more courage to be the person in charge of keeping someone safe.
You got something. Not gonna like it.
That's why the protagonist is brought to tears realizing it, and why Neil doesn't mourn walking away to what you can probably guess is his death. The protagonist tried to stop him from going because he cares about Neil, and that's all the reassurance Neil needed in the universe that his effort was worth it. When you learn that John David Washington's character is known only as a protagonist, it might sound like a gimmick at first, but like so many things in Nolan's films, the choice is a deliberate one, and it makes a point about who the character is and where he's going in his story. Arms dealer Priya Singh makes a point to Washington's character that he is a protagonist, not the protagonist of this story. Her point seems correct in that moment. There are indeed many people who are working to either collect the algorithm or ensure it remains in separate pieces, and they all surely consider themselves to be heroes in their stories. But the very end of the film upends everyone's expectations when a hero realizes that the whole movie has, to some extent, been the product of his own grand design. When he meets Priya in London for their final conversation, he tells her what he's realized. He hasn't been working for Priya, They've both been working for a future version of him. Washington becoming the protagonist occurs in that moment, at the center of a practiced spy's temporal pincer movement. He has the wisdom to recognize that he's in the middle of a plot constructed by his own future self, executed with the help of people like Neil. In achieving his task with the help of the people he trusts, he's ensured his own idealized future, as well as a better outcome for the world he inhabits. Tenet puts a ton of effort into his first half trying to convince the audience that the protagonist's failures are inevitable, and that Andrei Sator has all the cards in his hands because of his connection across space-time to the future. We don't know who Sator was talking to, but that's part of the point. All that matters is that Sator has and is obsessed with maintaining control. His wife, his child, his money, his business, and as it turns out, all of space-time can be under no one else's control but his, all to do with it as he pleases. Just before his death, Sator and the protagonist have a heated exchange about his plan to die and take the continuum with him, destroying all life. The protagonist calls him selfish, possessive, all kinds of names. Sator agrees, comparing himself to a god, and showing himself to have no faith or belief in anyone or anything outside of himself. According to what the future has told him, the Earth is a wreck, and the idea to assemble the algorithm is a plan to end the world as an act of mercy before it falls to what is heavily implied will be a climate change disaster. Sator cannot conceive of a world beyond the cruel one he sees coming. Rather than accept the idea that a global catastrophe may mar his personal legacy, he's decided that when he dies, the whole of creation has got to go with him. Sator locked into his position controlling the universe with a fitness tracker through happenstance, and the very job that gave him his power, mucking with radioactive materials, is likely the same one that gave him the pancreatic cancer. His sense of control comes from putting a gun to the head of everyone that threatens him, so it's fitting that his death is an ignoble and small one. Kat, Sator's estranged wife, initially appears to be an accidental casualty brought into the conflict as a protagonist tries to worm his way closer to Sator and his operation. As part of the overarching theme of control and self-actualization, her motivation is seeing Sator dead. She is kept as a gilded prisoner in the marriage because of the son she bore Sator. People, especially his son, are possessions to him, and he tells Kat that she is free to leave if she will agree to never see her son again. As the climax arrives, her task is to keep Sator from triggering his dead man switch by schmoozing him on his yacht in Vietnam, on the day he intends to end his life, thereby undoing space-time. Meanwhile, the protagonist, Neil, and a whole bunch of temporal soldiers take the fight to a Soviet-closed city to acquire the algorithm. This is also the same day Kat previously recalled seeing a woman, who she assumed to be a mistress of Sator's, dive from the yacht. That woman was, in fact, Kat herself, after Sator was killed and the algorithm was secured. Her past self saw her future self safe, sound, and free, the way she desperately wanted to be. The concept of time inversion was emphasized a lot in Tenet's marketing, but the movie's not necessarily about time travel. It's a storytelling conceit used to underline a much more basic idea. The future is uncertain for all of us, but if we want to maintain a chance of it being a good one, we need to trust each other. The protagonist's mission only works because he trusts Kat and Neil and others acting in good faith to do the best they can for the situation, themselves, and everything the protagonist hopes they will accomplish. They keep information from each other as an act of love and respect, a relinquishing of control. The protagonist has the faith and belief Sator completely lacks. Despite the fact that Neil constantly says what happened, that only goes as far as the individual experiencing it. The collective future is always in play. The protagonist attempts to kill himself with cyanide at the beginning of the movie out of this exact obligation to others. This selfless gesture is the act that qualifies him to learn about Tenet, the organization he himself will establish in the far future, which works to secure the greatest good for the greatest number of people. He's like a temporal Batman, basically. And while it's an allegory so huge it comes close to falling in on itself, it's meant to apply to all of us. At the end of the movie, Ives is the one who presents the idea of splitting the algorithm into pieces with Neil and the protagonist in order to keep it safe and unassembled. This clashes with the outlook of Priya Singh, who believed the assembled algorithm would empower the past against the future. To her, a war was inevitable, already being waged against the past, and that is why she had to die. By the end of the movie, we can understand that Tenet is a secretive concept sent back through time by the protagonist to ferret out those who would misuse the power of inversion and the algorithm. Tenet, as a protagonist conceives of it, is a test, and the test is learning what you, given the power, would do with the algorithm if you had it assembled before you. If you're motivated by control, as Priya and Sator were, you become a loose end. And that's dangerous because loose ends and their motivations destroy reality. Defending reality, defined in the movie by Neil as the uncertainty of existing in the moment, takes principled people whose central philosophy, or tenet, is to decentralize power. The ultimate lessons of the movie are that no man is a god, and there is always hope for the future when people work together. Look guys, Tenet was not that hard to understand, it wasn't. I will die on that hill.